Okay, hello everyone. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Excellent turnout, first of all. Thank you all for, making it on this Saturday. So today we're going to be talking about LinkedIn. And this is going to kind of serve as an introduction to what a LinkedIn is, what you can use it for, and a few bits of advice on different things you can do to improve your LinkedIn profile. So, just for those of you that just joined us and didn't hear my introductory comments, if you have any questions, please do drop them in the Q&A. We're going to have some time at the end of the presentation to answer them. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so to start off with, I just wanted to give a quick intro about General Intelligences, which is the organization that is sponsoring this free webinar. So it is a nonprofit that's focused on students between the ages of 17 to 26, although we do help students outside of that particular age range. And basically, we help to provide them with some resources beyond just academic resources. So beyond things like study guides and tutoring and all of that, we try to help people with, skills and developmental stuff, very similar to what we're doing here today with this webinar. If you wanted to stay in the loop about future events, we are on a lot of different social media platforms. So you can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. And we also post recordings to this on our website. And we do have actually also a YouTube channel where we post recordings as well. And those are listed here too. So it'll just be generalintelligences.org. So now, just to get started, I wanted to start off with this excerpt that I took from one of the articles I was reading when I first started my LinkedIn. And I think that it's just really good, just because I think it gives us some really nice statistics on how important it is to have a LinkedIn. So just to read it out to everyone, it says networking is more important than ever. Only 15% of jobs that are available are ever advertised. This means the other 85% of jobs can only be found through networking, and LinkedIn has become essential to any networker's toolkit. 94% of recruiters use LinkedIn to vet candidates, and 93% of hiring managers look at a candidate's social media profile before an interview. And so these statistics are actually from LinkedIn itself that actually published those stats actually a few years ago. So they might have changed a little bit, but if anything, I think that it's probably more important now than ever, given the fact that we are online and it's a little bit harder to make those connections in person. So that's just something to keep in mind as to why you should want to have a nice professional and online presence. Um, it's just very important for pretty much any career path that you decide to take, whether it's, in business or even if it's not in business. Even if you're, pre-med or pre-law, it's still really important to be able to know people and connect to people. And so without further ado, we'll get started with this. So on this slide, I just wanted to post a couple of to-dos. So when you first go and make a LinkedIn account, before you get your LinkedIn really, to its final stages, these are basically the steps that you have to follow. So they're very similar to what you would see on pretty much any like social media site. So you want to upload a photo, tell tell a little bit about yourself and whatnot. But the distinction is that for LinkedIn, there's a more specific way to go about doing those things just to make sure that you are, retaining your professionalism and really putting your best foot forward. So, as an example, for your professional photo, you want to pick something that is, professional, of course. So that means like no selfies, no photos with any Snapchat filters or stuff like that. And you'd be surprised how many people actually do use those kinds of photos, especially when they're in high school and have a LinkedIn. But that's just not very professional. It doesn't, of course, have to be professionally taken. So I think a lot of people conflate those two things. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you paid money for and took at a studio or had someone take of you. It just needs to have a plain background, and you can honestly just take it on your iPhone. Just make sure that what you're wearing is appropriate also, just like anything you would wear to like an interview. So for adding your industry and location, so it's really actually important to add your location. And I'll tell you a little bit why. So, a lot of times LinkedIn will have this kind of search feature for any recruiters that are looking to fill spots for internships or jobs or anything else. And sometimes they will filter it to only include certain locations geographically. So it's really important that that information is accurate and that it's accurate to where you are residing for most of the year. So for a lot of college students, for example, where you personally call home and where you are attending school might be in different places geographically, maybe even across the country. So I would say for that you can really decide. I personally just found that I live on campus for most of my time during the year, approximately like 10 months. So to me, it made more sense to put my location as Ann Arbor because that's where I attend school. But that's totally your call as to what you want to do with that, but just keep that in mind. So for customizing your LinkedIn URL, that's just something nice that you can do if you wanted to. It's just a setting, and you can just make it so that it's your first and your last name as your actual URL when you go and give that to somebody or put it on a resume. It's not a necessity, but it's just something nice. And then we'll go in a little bit more depth about summary and experience and skills, as well as education. So I'm going to just briefly go through that. And then as for connecting with 50 plus contacts, that's just what it needs on LinkedIn's end for your profile to be considered complete based on like their algorithm. You should not want to stop at just 50 contacts. Of course, the best kind of traction that your account is going to get is when you have 500 plus. If anyone is, currently on LinkedIn, I'm sure you've probably already seen that sort of icon that shows up for that. And so basically, when you reach that point on LinkedIn, it's going to show your profile to more people. And just in general, you're going to show up more on searches and stuff like that. And then the last step would be to turn on let recruiters know that you're open to work or internship or whatever else. So there's a couple of different categories for that on the actual LinkedIn interface. And so those are just some things to keep in mind. And also, it's totally up to you as a person. I personally like to use LinkedIn both on my laptop and on my phone. So I have the app as well. I personally do that just because I'm on LinkedIn very frequently, talking to people and responding to connections and stuff like that. If you feel like you're using it a little bit less frequently, then you can definitely just stick to the laptop or desktop sort of interface that they have. So just to kind of reiterate what I talked about, because I think that this is a really, really important one, make sure that you're using professional photos and language. So again, it doesn't mean that you have to spend a bunch of money on the photo. That's not what you need for your profile photo. You just need it to again look professional. So have that, blank background, face centered. You could be smiling, maybe you don't have to be smiling. You could have a serious face too. But just make sure that that's what you are, depicting yourself as. And then in addition to that, I just wanted to touch really quickly on language. So obviously, a lot of people have opinions on things, which is totally fine. But LinkedIn is not really that kind of platform where you want to talk about things in that specific sort of way. This is supposed to just be kind of like a polished version of you, where you're not really saying anything that someone that is a recruiter or anything else would consider to be particularly controversial. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, it's fine to have, your political beliefs, your religious beliefs, and all of that kind of stuff. But just keep that in mind when you're making your profile. So I'm going to start off with an example of someone that's really famous, of course, on LinkedIn and just in general. I'm sure everybody knows who Bill Gates is. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a rundown of some things that are good on his profile and some things that you should definitely not do. on his profile. So the first thing would be that he has a very nice header photo. So on LinkedIn, it's really nice that you can kind of have this thing behind your main profile picture and you can customize it to be pretty much anything you want. I think he does a really nice job here of having it be a collage of different things that his foundation has contributed to. So you can see here that he also has photos of him speaking with people at interviews, presumably, and stuff like that as well. So just looking at this photo immediately, you have an idea of, what he does, what his interests are a little bit, and whatnot. So I think that this does a really good job. It doesn't have to look like this. It doesn't have to be a photo collage. It can sometimes just be, plain. But it just has to be something that you feel describes you very well, and gives a little bit more detail than what your, um, tagline would give. And so for here, the next thing I wanted to touch on is that he has a really good title. And he also has his contact info and location updated. So again, those are super important things to have. So he has his title, which is the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Excellent title. You know immediately what that is. And then for the contact info, it's really good to have kind of your email linked to your account just so that in case someone wants to get in touch with you about something or, has any questions about maybe one of your experiences, that they can reach out to you off of the platform as well as they have a messaging feature on the platform as well. And then, like I said, having the location is, of course, super important. So he has here Seattle, Washington. So we know immediately where he's located. And that's really helpful. And then for his about section, so it's actually a little bit briefer than I would suggest, but I'm going to go into that a little bit later. But of course, that's just because he is, so well known as a person that he can do that. But not all of us are, Bill Gates. So just keep that in mind that you do want to use that section to your advantage and touch on a couple of, keywords. So for example, here he has that he's a co-founder, a voracious reader, an avid traveler, and an active blogger. So of course, what do we get from reading that? We know, what his interests are, what his professional pursuits are, what his hobbies are. And so it's really good to kind of present yourself as a multifaceted individual. Yes, this is a platform for professional development, but you don't want to seem like you're just one dimensional. So do try to include, maybe some hobbies or things that you find interesting as well. Okay, so the next thing I was going to highlight on Bill Gates's LinkedIn is the featured section, the activity section, and the experience sections. So for the featured section, you can see here that he basically has taken a couple of places that he has been featured recently and put those at the top of his profile. So you could think of this kind of like how on Twitter you can, pin your tweet that you're most proud of, or there are similar things on other websites as well. Basically, this is just a really good place if you've done any sort of, community work and maybe you got featured in like a local newspaper or something of that nature. That's just a place to go and put that. Or maybe if you got a certificate for, an internship or a program that you're very proud of that was really hard or difficult to get, then that could also be something that you put in your featured. I would try to limit that to maybe like 5 or 6 different things just because you don't want somebody to be scrolling through your featured too much. And like I said, it's called featured for a reason, and that's because you're just trying to highlight a couple of things. So the next thing is activity. So very similar to how Instagram was back in the day, you can see exactly what posts other people have liked and commented on, and basically when that happened too. So it's both a nice feature and a not nice feature at the same time. It's nice because obviously you can see what people that you follow or that you've connected with are engaging with. And if anything is kind of similar or like about an opportunity or something like that, you also end up seeing it too. And so that's really good. Like if they like a post about a scholarship or something, that'll also show up on your feed. But it's also bad in a sense as well because anything that you are, liking or commenting, everyone can see that immediately on your profile. and it's not really hidden in any kind of way at all. So that's another thing to keep in mind again when I talked about how you want to have professional language and like a professional, you know, attribute on like this website. That's because of the fact that you can see all of your activity. So someone can go and see if you swore at someone in a comment section or something like that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Then we have the experience section. So that's a place where you could put, volunteer stuff, research stuff, any work that you have, maybe an internship. And as you can see here, he has, his experience at Microsoft and for his foundation as well. Again, but we aren't all Bill Gates. Not everyone knows exactly who we are. And let's just face it, not all of us are, multimillionaires either. So, we are going to go into some more specifics of what you should be doing that kind of expands on what Bill Gates's LinkedIn has. So, for your LinkedIn summary, again, that was the section that was just below your photo. That is going to be something that you talk about, where you talk about some, experiences that you have, maybe your major, what your career trajectory is going to be, maybe. Like, so for example, if you're a pre-law student, you could say, you know, dedicated student with interest in pursuing a career in civil law or something like that. And so that could be really something that you could do. And then another thing that you want to keep in mind is using some keywords. So we're going to go into that a little bit more later on in the presentation. But that's again also something that you can include. So for the next section, we are going to, it's very aptly called How to Write Your Experiences When You Aren't Bill Gates. So I'm just going to give everybody a second to kind of read through what we have up here since it's quite a lot. And then once you've read through it, I will go ahead and discuss it a little bit more. So I'm just going to give you all 1 minute, if that sounds okay. Okay, so I hope that was enough time to read it. If not, that's okay because we're going to be going over a couple of the different things that stand out from this. So, as you can see here, we have the title, which I left in just so that you can get an idea of what it is. And then I blocked out the company info and stuff like that just for the sake of privacy. And so what it does that's really good is it starts out with a description of the program. So we have here that it's a STEM program, that it's been featured by Forbes, and that it helps girls that are interested in STEM. So that's a very good thing to have right off of the bat in your description. Then after that, it goes ahead and quantifies the number of people that it impacts and who is impacted. So again, we see here that it has this goal of helping 10,000 girls, with 5,000 girls impacted by the end of 2020. And then it also goes ahead and lists some specific stats. So for example, you see here $14,500 for this fundraiser that they had, and 65% of students identify as underrepresented. And so those are just really good pieces of information to have. It also mentions some things like professional development meetings and what the goals of the position are. And so those are really important things to include as well. And yeah, so with that, we will continue to the next thing. So for this section, I'm again just going to give you guys a minute to look at it. Okay, so for this section, this is called the education section. So we didn't see that, of course, on the example. but it was still there. And so here we have one from high school, but of course you would do this for college or, any sort of graduate degree and study like that too. So what we have here is the title and the school are blocked out again, but it mentions some good things that it does is that it mentions any courses that are relevant. So for here, because it's high school, you have AP and IB courses that the student has taken. And so if you were in college, it would be relevant courses that you took in college for that section. And then it includes any activities and societies that this person is involved in. And it talks about what positions that they hold. Another place to put that is there's another section, of course, also on LinkedIn, where it's organizations, or if you feel like it was a very impactful activity, you can completely bring that out and put it under experience. But again, that's totally your call. It depends on how much you want to elaborate on a certain experience, or if you just want to mention that you did it. And then so another thing that it does here that's really good is that it talks about different, GPA and scores. And so for example, you can also put scores in another section on LinkedIn. But a lot of people find the GPA to be associated with the education section anyway, because on a resume, you'd usually see it there. So it's usually a good practice to have that on there too. If your GPA or any of your scores are what you consider to not be super strong scores, you don't have to put them. They're just something that it's just something that's nice to have if you do feel like you had some very good academics. So, for example, a lot of people will recommend that under a 3.5, you kind of want to stay away from putting that on your resume. That's not a hard rule. Also depends on like what level you're at. For example, a 3.5 in high school is much different than a 3.5 in college. And even a 3.5 in college is much different depending on whether it's, a community college or a top 20 school or an Ivy, and then it even goes even further into that, and it depends on your major. So, for example, engineering majors usually have lower GPAs just because of how classes are curved and whatnot. And some majors, of course, have grade inflation on the other end of the spectrum. So, that's just something to keep in mind. So, if you feel like your scores are good relative to your school and your personal context, then I think include it, even if it doesn't maybe meet this cutoff. So the next thing is there's an area on LinkedIn where you can write any certificates. So basically, what we can see here is this is just a Coursera certificate, but this applies for any issuing body of certificates that you could possibly have. So a good important thing to keep in mind here is don't pay for any sort of certificates. Most certificates you should not pay for unless it's for something like professional. Like, for example, if you wanted to be like a certified nurse assistant or something like that, where you need a certificate to deal with patients, then yes, you should, obviously invest in such a thing. But if it's something like this where it's on Coursera or a similar sort of website, I don't recommend paying for those certificates. I would recommend trying to see if any are free or maybe offered through your school. And make sure also to take courses that have relevant skills that you can talk about or expand on, maybe in your resume or during an interview. So, for example, you could say here that maybe this person was in accounting, for example, and they also were able to develop the skills in personal financial planning based on the fact that they took this course and learned a little bit more about, how to save for retirement or stuff like that. So that's just something to keep in mind too. So again, this section is accomplishments. So basically, what you have here as subdivisions are courses, honors and awards, languages, organizations, but you do also have a spot for scores, which is not included on here. Again, like I said earlier, that's one of the places where you can put, your GPA if you wanted to, your maybe ACT, SAT score, AP score, IB score, whatever else. Those are some places that you can include it. Again, it's totally not necessary. This is just something that you can add. So for courses, again, you want to add relevant courses here. So what I mean by relevant is relevant to the career that you are choosing to pursue. So if you're interested in applying to graduate school, for example, and maybe let's say public health, then you would want to add any relevant courses that are maybe in like statistical analysis or healthcare disparities or stuff like that, because those are considered relevant, right? And so for honors and awards, that's another section that we have on here. So that's any sort of scholarships that you've earned, personal recognitions. One of the major ones, of course, is being on the dean's list, which means that you have above a certain GPA for the semester or quarter, whatever system you're on. Then languages is another big category. So for this category, make sure that you're being honest about your abilities with the languages that you put down. I have definitely heard stories of people being tested on them at an interview because the interviewer actually spoke that particular language and decided to conduct the interview in that language because the applicant had stated that they had a very good command of it. And so you definitely don't want to be that person that goes ahead and lies about how good they are in a certain language. So definitely keep that in mind. LinkedIn does a really good job of having a bunch of different levels that you can pick for your language comfort. So for example, it'll talk about, basic to professional, to I think it also has like native or fluency as well. So there's a lot of different ones there just so that you can click which one is most appropriate to you. If you just took like a French class or a Spanish class in high school and it was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago and you haven't, opened your book since then and you don't really feel comfortable or confident in it, then make sure that you just kind of like reflect that on your account. Okay, so the last part of this section is organizations. So this would be any sort of professional organizations or society. So one of the ones I see a lot for high school students is the National Academy of Sciences. One that I see a lot for college students could be anything relating to your field of study. So National Society of, Hispanic Engineers or anything else. There's a bunch of those. Totally depends on what school you go to and what activities you participate in. But that would just be the spot to have those. Okay. So the next thing to keep in mind are recommendations and also endorsements. I didn't specifically specify that in the title, but it's included, and then groups. So recommendations on LinkedIn work very much like what you would think a recommendation looks like for a letter. But of course, they're much shorter just because they're just meant to be a few sentences on your profile. You can try to have people give you a recommendation. Ideally, they have to be people that, were your superior wherever you worked. So maybe like your boss or your manager or anything like that, that can speak to some of your skills that are relevant to what you're currently doing. And so that's something that's an optional thing. It's not obviously by any means a requirement, but it just looks good if someone, comes to your profile and sees, someone talking very highly about you. It's just another thing that you can add. And so the next thing would be also skills. So you can list some of your skills on LinkedIn. They have practically every skill that you could think of. And if they don't have it, you can literally type it in and add it as a skill. So that's anything from, like data entry, Microsoft Office, leadership, and like less concrete skills that are more, abstract. All of those are on there. So you can list as many as you want. Um, I've definitely seen on a lot of groups that people are, saying that they'll endorse your skill if you endorse their skills. And while I think that might be all right in some situations, I think that you should try to stay away from that, just because you wouldn't want to, put your name on endorsing somebody if you don't really know them. Like, obviously, you just know them on the internet. So maybe they are really not, organized or know how to code or whatever else that they're saying that they do. And then that reflects poorly on you as a person because you've endorsed someone then and put your name on that endorsement without fully considering if they are competent in that. So that again reflects badly on you too. So that's just something to keep in mind. So groups, LinkedIn has groups. They kind of function similarly to like Facebook groups as well. So you just join them based on if you have any sort of interest, and there's like an admin that'll let you into the group and whatnot. I would recommend joining location-based networking groups, like maybe like a young professionals of X city that's like located nearby. That's a really good spot to see if there's any relevant opportunities in your area. And also, a lot of times you get a lot of connection requests from people in that area just because they're trying to grow their network. So that's a really good thing to do. And then you can obviously also join any interest based or organization based groups. So, for example, for one of the communities at my college, they have a LinkedIn group for alumni. And also, a lot of colleges, just in general, have LinkedIn groups for alumni. And so that's just a really good place to kind of connect with people that went to your school. Um, and especially connect with people that went to your school that are working at a place you wanna work at or something of that nature, and so that's just really helpful. Okay, so the next thing is keywords, and keep in mind, by the way, everyone, if you have any questions to drop them in the Q&A, any at all, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation, so definitely sit tight. Anyway, moving on, keywords are a way to stand out. So those kind of fall into two main categories. Again, I took this from a article that I read on LinkedIn itself, which is another great thing that you can do on LinkedIn is to read articles that are posted and whatnot. But anyway, so there's industry lingo, which is specific to what you're doing in your field. So that's going to differ for everybody. What someone writes about when they are interested in law is different than what someone would write about when they're interested in engineering and so on. Then there's experience based jargon. So that's anything like if you've ever heard of using action verbs on your resume, that would be something that's very commensurate to what this is saying. So that's something you can include too. Then you can use keywords, mostly try to emphasize using them in your summary and experience sections. But of course, you can also use them in other places too. Okay, so now we're going to get on with questions, and I'm gonna stop sharing so that I can look at the Q&A. Okay. So first question that I see here is how would you network using LinkedIn? Is there a working template we could use to email and find opportunities? So I'm going to answer this live. So that's a really excellent question. It was asked a couple minutes into the presentation. So I hope that we were able to cover it a little bit, but I'll still expand. And so on LinkedIn itself, one of the things that you can do is message people directly that you've connected with or are hoping to connect with. And there's a lot of templates online for reaching out to them based on whether you're in high school or college and what field you're in. So I would recommend looking into those specific templates because it's very specific to who you are as a person and what you're looking for. So it would be different if someone was looking for an internship as opposed to a research position, as opposed to just, someone to ask questions about something. So I would recommend doing that. And then again, like I said earlier, there is the contact info section. So once you've connected with someone, if they have their email address connected to their account, you're going to be able to reach out to them on there. I would recommend reaching out to them on LinkedIn first and making sure that they're okay with maybe answering any sort of questions that you have and whatnot. But that's just my opinion. But yeah.